So we are eagerly waiting to hear from Mr. Srikanth. Please give a round of applause for Srikanth, and we'll start.
Thank you. And hope you are, as he said, after 2 hours of sitting here and observing people talking, I hope that you're recharged to maybe absorb another hour and so of content. So it's not so much that I'm going to cover all the 5 evolution. Maybe I'm just going to talk about a few, specifically with what we call hits and misses. So I'm just going to focus on a key highlights, okay? So that will be my target. So this will be my rough, you can say, summary in terms of how I'm going to cover. I'll briefly touch upon the role of the 5 layer, especially because people come from different backgrounds. Brief touch on evolution, and then I'll go into features, first the hits, and then the misses, and then maybe some lessons for us in the future. That would be my sort of aim or assumption. Next slide, please. Yeah. Somehow I'm not able to get the clicker working, so bear with me. So the 5 layer was primarily designed to work in this sort of an environment, what we call as a multi-path environment. And right from day one, we should appreciate that except for the very short initial phase, the 5 layer has been very focused on target for high phi rates because it's a LAN technology. So it's not going to be some single digit Mbps forever. It has to evolve to hundreds and gigabits per second. This was thought during the very early stages of the 5 layer evolution. And we should give credit for the people who might be actually involved in all of this. And so, except for, as I said, during the very initial phases, we jumped on to technologies which can work in true non-line of sight environments and providing, the capacity to evolve to higher and higher bit rates. Okay, so this should be kept in mind because the intersymbol interference due to multipath increases as we try to operate over higher bandwidths as well as provide higher bit rates. Okay. So if you look at the evolution story, as you can see that apart from the early days of 1111B where we had spread spectrum based technologies which was forced upon 802.11 by regulators, we had an OFDM based evolution. And though we have had technologies like OFDMA and MU-MIMO, all those are on top of the OFDM base, which has been very critical for the evolution. And so obviously you can see that will be my first focus area as to say how we have gone about making sure that the primary objective of providing high bit rates over this indoor multipath non-line of sight environment is met over a reasonable distance. Okay, so that's the sort of target that people set themselves out to be. So as you can see, spread spectrum was there for the initial time. After that, it's been an OFDM based evolution, but we have added other things which have sat well with the OFDM, MIMO, for example, and then other announcements like OFDMA and MU-MIMO as well. So if you look at OFDM, for those of you coming from a non-physical layer background, it's a very simple, elegant transmission technique. People refer to it as a modulation scheme, etc. We don't have to get into nitty-gritties. It's a transmission technique where a wide bandwidth is divided into a narrow set of subcarriers or tones on which we can put different types of modulation symbols, and that way we attack the multipath problem elegantly as well as provide a lot of flexibility with respect to the whole transmission. Okay. So why do I call it a hit? I call it a hit simply because it solved the fundamental multipath problem in an elegant manner, and it has stood the test of time. As I said, 1999 was when OFDM was introduced into the 802.11a specs in 5 gigahertz. Very far cited sort of indulgence. Today we criticize the people in the standards for saying they didn't think about spatial reuse. Luckily they didn't. They thought about OFDM early enough much before it was in the cellular standards. While today I had a discussion with the Candela team on a podcast, it was like, which technologies maybe Wi-Fi picked first as compared to cellular. OFDM came into the Wi-Fi world much earlier than in the cellular world. Very nice way of handling multipath, solving the fading problem by combining the interleaving and coding, and also providing very good spectral efficiency, being able to combine with techniques like MIMO, adaptive modulation and coding, etc., etc. And most importantly, it has stood the test of time. Okay, I'll comment a little bit more on that as well. If you look at the very first OFDM implementations in 802.11, basically it was, a 64 point FFT on which we just achieved a peak speed of 54 Mbps. But that just set the stage, because once we got it working, and remember, regulators would not allow it in 2.4, so the spec was in 5 gig. Then once we demonstrated, then 11G came into 2.4, and then we have had this success story where we've expanded to 40 megahertz, 80 megahertz, 160, 320, all based on the fundamental OFDM. Okay, it remains the same. Some minor tweaks here and there, etc. And you can see the impact of the bandwidth, which is another hit which combines with OFDM, is that it has given rise to higher and higher bitrate possibilities, which is very important for the standard, especially if some of you are very young, but you may not remember that in the very early days of Wi-Fi, it was compared to Bluetooth. After that, it was compared to Ethernet. So the enterprises are asking, Ethernet is running at 100 megabits per second, going to gigabit. Why should I have something much lower? So we were under constant pressure to push the bit rates to some reasonable level. And I would say post 2010 odd time frame is when the Ethernet comparison was dead. Okay, Bluetooth comparison was dead long time back, but the Ethernet comparison also was dead after some time. Okay. So the scalable bandwidth combination with OFDM is a big hit in my view. Okay, and the wider bandwidths have served us well, because here I see in 5 gigahertz, in 2.4, of course, no point in talking about wider bandwidths, but in 5 gigahertz we've had the 20s, the 40s, the 80s, possibly not 160s, but at least the 20, 40, 80s, and though 160 was proposed for 5 gigahertz, possibly become a reality in 6 gigahertz, and the 320 megahertz option also gives us interesting possibilities. So higher bandwidths plus OFDM are a very nice combination for giving us that peak bitrate working in a decent sized environment, because without that we will not be able to attack the multipath problems. What is another hit? Another hit is also MIMO, right? Introduced way back in 11N. Again, it was preceding the cellular standards at that time. So the most important advantage of MIMO is with one antenna on each side, you can get some capacity. What can you get with multiple antennas? Is this kind of an effect, what we call spatial multiplexing. This is obviously, as I said, rate was the 5 layers role is to give us better and better rates and work in multipath environments. Then the rest of the system will have to adjust to other constraints and so on. Okay, so MIMO, in my opinion, has been a big part of the success story. The scalable bandwidth, MIMO, all riding together with OFDM. So OFDM is not good just standalone. It's also good with the scalable bandwidth and with MIMO. Okay, putting spread spectrum and MIMO would have been very difficult. Okay. So much so that today, even in the 6G cellular world, we are not thinking too far from OFDM. And I can confidently tell you Wi-Fi 8 is not even looking at anything other than OFDM base. Okay. Okay, and MIMO in Wi-Fi has its own challenges. So just a real sort of touch, just like in the bandwidth story, there are some places where we don't use the higher bandwidths, especially if there are enterprise folks. They might hesitate to say that 80 megahertz or 160 megahertz is a big part of the story, but we have to live with the fact that there are two worlds in Wi-Fi, the enterprise and the home world, and we'll have to somehow straddle these two from a solutioning point of view. So MIMO does have some complexity impacts, and the impact of that is that the client world has not progressed after a certain point. So 2x2 MIMO has been sort of a ceiling even in the highest end clients, whether it's the highest end Apple iPhones or some of the Samsung Galaxies or the MacBooks, etc., etc. So where can we use the 4x4 and 3x3s or maybe 8x8 effectively? It's possibly in the backhaul between APs and for some incremental sort of enhancements with real life clients. Okay, so there is, as I said, in my summary, this will get reflected. Okay, what about a miss? We've been talking all positive, and I said it's and misses. So we also need to look at the sour side of it. I think many people probably will agree that the MU-MIMO story has not gone according to plan. Not because there has been a lack of trial. I think it's a complex intervention. Nice to draw pictures like this and get a lot of votes. As I said, we are discussing again about the standards where, we had a lot of comment from Susinder and others. It's a very tough problem to really get it right in practice. Of course, it does have combination with other things, but purely from the 5-layer perspective, the downlink MU-MIMO was originally introduced in 11AC, or what we know as Wi-Fi 5 these days. Okay, and it builds on this beamforming framework. And one of the challenges in Wi-Fi beamforming is that it has a large feedback. Okay, and in my opinion, even the SU beamforming is a little bit of a question mark in terms of its utility in a wide variety of scenario, given that the feedback is such a humongous thing, affecting the potential performance overall with and without beamforming, right? So MU-MIMO building on top of that, people thought that we can gravitate from SU-MIMO to MU-MIMO, but very quickly we realized that the feedback, the grouping of the clients, and all those become a real life challenge where you could achieve the benefits, but those are going to be very selective environments, selective client combinations, etc., which are going to work. Then somebody could raise the question, what about uplink MU-MIMO? And as you can see, it's even a non-starter, simply because we have it in the specs. Some chipset people might claim I support, but practically it's a non-starter, right? So an uplink MU-MIMO is not that it is something more complex. Downlink MU-MIMO tends to be much more complex. Uplink MU-MIMO is closer to the real MIMO, but the whole triggered sort of mechanisms for uplink has been a challenge in practice. Okay, so MU-MIMO, I would definitely say it might be a miss. What could be another miss? And I think this is a contentious issue because it always raises a lot more questions. We introduced OFDMA in Wi-Fi 6 with a lot of fanfare. We said, oh, it's going to solve our high density problems and so on and so forth. But there's a little bit of a question mark as to whether we have gotten it right. I mean, the real practical studies which have appeared in, say, from neutral parties in WLPC kind of places, we haven't seen the impact of OFDMA in anything significant for us to shout about. It does introduce a lot of complexity in the solution, though. A Wi-Fi 6 chip is a big upgrade from a Wi-Fi 5 chip for the AP side especially. So we do pay for all of that, right? But do we get the benefits? It's a very elegant technology. And then, as I said, I had a discussion on the cellular versus Wi-Fi business yesterday with the Candler team. And cellular OFDMA is 100% hit. And that's very different ball game because it's a very scheduled oriented system, licensed spectrum with the time and frequency axis both under the control of the base station, and very elaborate feedback and buffer status reports. All these things make both downlink and uplink OFDMA work in cellular. Expecting that to translate in an unlicensed, unscheduled system is a tough ask. We somehow thought, we convinced ourselves that, okay, the lab or the simulation numbers and the calculations will somehow, kind of get us through. But I think that when the sort of rubber hits the road, we haven't still got it to work. So I'll still give it a chance because fortunately or unfortunately, Wi-Fi 8 is not having a big ticket sort of enhancements in all these areas, or in the 5 area, I would say. It's building on some of the OFDMA possibilities to give us some sort of incremental advantages. But if the basic OFDMA itself is in some sort of a doubt, we don't know how well that's going to affect the Wi-Fi 8 enhancements. Time will tell how that's going to be. Higher order QAM or higher order modulation, as you can say, right? So we did, as I said, as a part of the OFDM exercise in 1999, we had 64 QAM. However, remember that that was early stages where 64 QAM was a big deal in 2000 time frame, especially in 5 gigahertz, we must understand. When they successfully managed to get that off the ground, they had the confidence to go to the next generation. And I think we took enough time between the 11A 64 QAM and the 11AC 256 QAM, almost 10 odd years, you can say. So it was a good time gap. Then we got a little greedier and said, let's put 1024 QAM, and another next one we are putting 4K QAM. And now many of you, Candela, famous for testing. I know how much 4K QAM will really work in practice. But most importantly, we must understand that 4K QAM, when it comes for the designers, it's hell. Because the amount of work right from the chipset baseband and RF solution and then your front-end RF that you'll have to do to get it to work, it's diminishing returns. So it's very good for the white papers and the marketing statements. But remember, ultimately as consumers and engineers, we need to pick elegant solutions which have to really give some substantial benefits, right? In my list, I think this is not the way to go if we want to progress at some substantial level. And it shows the story. Wi-Fi or 802.11 PHY is mature. And so that implies that we are now getting to the stage where we will have difficulty in really getting those blockbuster sort of enhancements. Okay. So where am I? So the summary slide. And so sort of somewhat qualitative as well. I think OFDM, there is no question in my mind that it's definitely something of a hit, which has basically taken us off the ground in terms of the whole ecosystem to be able to work in a multipath environment and provide decent coverage, etc., etc. So much so that Wi-Fi 8 is not thinking anything more than OFDM. MIMO, why somewhat? Because about 2x2, we are not able to get the client ecosystems to say, hey, take the next bet. We are not able to push that, and they have their own reasons, right? Scalable bandwidths, home guys love it. Peer-to-peer guys love it. But enterprise people will say, hey, why are you jumping on to 320 megahertz? We have no scope for doing that. So hopefully that gets justified. Not something, which is taken off. MU-MIMO for sure, I think, is almost on the back burner of most people. Uplink MU-MIMO is a non-starter. I'm hoping we'll still have something to show for OFDMA work that we have done. And remember that higher order QAM, I don't expect 8K QAM or 16K QAM. Or if you have a vote in the standards, don't vote for it simply because I think the amount of work and costs we'll spend on that does not result in benefits. Okay? Thank you so much. If there's time for questions, I'll take it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Srikanth. Chetan. Yeah.
Srikanth, I have two questions. The first one is on channel coding, transition or evolution from BCC to then we moved to LDPC to the Polar. Has it all been a hit, or are there how do you perceive that?
So we have only moved from BCC to LDPC. Polar is not in Wi-Fi. Polar is in control channel in cellular, not in Wi-Fi. Definitely a hit because the block sizes of the data that we are moving is quite huge from 11AC onwards. And there has been, decent studies which have been presented earlier in literature, which has borne fruit in the implementation. So definitely LDPC has added value to the whole scheme of things. So there is no question. So much so that Wi-Fi brought LDPC first, cellular has followed. 4G cellular did not have LDPC. 5G cellular saw Wi-Fi success in bringing LDPC to the table and has adopted that. Okay, so definitely a hit.
Thank you, Srikanth. The second question was on the different form factors that we are right now looking at, other than the smartphones like smartwatches and the smart glasses. So what role will Wi-Fi 5 have a place in that?
So this is actually an interesting question because, in my view, Wi-Fi has not done anything very good for IoT specifically. But it is being absorbed by, I'm calling all this IoT because not the classical data hogging market. But somehow Wi-Fi is very friendly when people look for solutions, because I think they like the fact that the access point is nearby, not so much for the smartwatch, but for many other things. And there, if you look at it, data rate hardly matters for many of these things, whether it's a washing machine or a fridge, etc. So the Wi-Fi 5 is just a pipe. More importantly, the fact that you have an access point and an IP-oriented system, that is the Internet Protocol-oriented system, is more important than the Wi-Fi 5 rate. In fact, for them, there is no point in going to Wi-Fi 6. I think practically, the practical people have stopped with Wi-Fi 4. All the people show Wi-Fi 6 has IoT support and all. I mean, if somebody talks to me in private, I'll have a different answer for that. Wi-Fi 4 is a great solution for many IoT. One stream, 20 megahertz, is more than sufficient for many of the IoT class applications. It's a sweet spot, I would say.
You mentioned MIMO as somewhat.
Yes.
And in my practical experience, especially from an OEM perspective, building a higher order MIMO inside an equipment, I would like to put it in the other side, because it is not really giving the advantage of the cost that goes on into building it.
Right.
How many 8x8 MIMO or 4x4 MIMO APs are really giving the worth of the cost it incurs?
Right. No, so that's why my somewhat was actually more from the client ecosystem perspective, because client ecosystem doesn't go more than 2x2, but you united it to the fact that why do I need a 4x4 AP or even anything more than 2x2 AP? I think there is, as I said, one use case in the home is the mesh connections between APs. If you think that the 4x4 gives you better for the mesh, go ahead and do it. At least it gets used. But in the client ecosystem, remember that it does not get used. There have been people who have argued that the number of APs you require from an uplink coverage perspective might get reduced, but that's a very detailed analysis, and that might vary across. I would think that when you go to the enterprise vendors, and I'm sure the home vendors, they always have the option of a 2x2 AP. And that becomes very useful when you look at the cost and the benefits that one can get out of both these options. So definitely, I think the 2x2 on the table is a very good option to have. Yeah.
Where would you put the mesh part of it, since you touched upon mesh?
Because the mesh is not a my today's talk was more on 802.11 PHY evolution or hits and messes. I think the mesh has been interesting because the mesh is only for the very limited home market, doesn't come in the enterprise. And I think it has solved an important problem, which is, when you have coverage holes, etc. But is it like a blockbuster thing? I'm not so sure. And remember that, the easy mesh also has its own concerns, but that's for another day. Yeah.
Siddharth, can we have another question? Yeah.
This was a question from one of our online attendees, Sheila. She's a wireless LAN researcher at ISC Bangalore. So why is uplink OFDMA challenging and harder in practice? And there's another question, is OFDMA used in practice, at least in downlink in 11AX?
Yeah, so first question is, it's not just the 5 part which is challenging, but people have put the support. But I think the challenge comes more from the fact which Susinder also alluded to, the buffer status report, which is essential for me to schedule properly for you to send uplink multi-user transmission. That mechanism is really not working in practice. And I have several videos about that on my YouTube channel. So one can look at the justifications for why that's not necessary for a client. I think that is the more fundamental problem. It's not so much the uplink OFDMA 5 implementation, but the fact that the something to sort of trigger the whole uplink multi-user case is just not there. Downlink OFDMA is happening from whatever stats we are getting, but as I said, I have not seen any clear benefits. You could as well not have OFDMA and you'll be very happy as well. That is what practical data tell us.
Sainath. Yeah. Hi, Srikanth. So what innovation is happening in Wi-Fi 8.5? Do you anticipate any features from Wi-Fi 8.5 to get into your list of hits?
There is a hint of it already. I have put out some material which you will get more detail. Nothing blockbuster, let me say. Okay, it's all very incremental. In fact, just to give a clue, Wi-Fi 8 is seemingly taken a very low-key stance. All the innovations are, plus 0.5 this direction, plus 0.5 this direction. So it's very small, minute increments. So I'm not sure whether, 5-wise, there are some, like for example, extended long range PPDU is a 5 enhancement. We have tried that before, not so successful. There are more granular MCSs available, might have an RVR implication, performance implication. Like these, there are some, but these are all minor enhancements. Doubtful whether all of them will come to the market in a big way, at least in the majority of cases.
Any other question? Manoj?
Hi Srikanth, thanks for the session. So regarding the 5 layer, if we talk about the NOMA, as we all know that NOMA have been using the cellular, right? So what if is there any chance to bring the NOMA in the Wi-Fi? If yes, is there any changes we need to do on the 5 layer side, because it uses these successive interfere cancellations, right? So is there any changes we need to bring on the 5 layer if we need? Is there any?
It's not happening on cellular. This is also a myth that people have propagated.
Yes.
It doesn't. It's a very difficult problem to crack. It does not happen in a standardized way in cellular. Okay? So there are a lot of papers. You can write academic papers like spatial reuse. One can write a lot of nice papers and construct graphs and some theory. NOMA is not practical in cellular. Okay? It's being discussed, but there is no concrete. If at all, it's a marginal thing at all. Wi-Fi 802.11 standards are a little bit more saner than 3GPP standards in my view, right? Because their cost budgets are much smaller. They don't go as ambitious as NOMA. So nowhere on the table.
Okay, thanks.
Any other question?
Yeah, hello. So when we compare OFDM with cellular technology and Wi-Fi, so is there any reason why the flexible subcarrier spacing is not implemented in Wi-Fi?
Because you must understand there is no need. Because why was there a flexible subcarrier need in cellular world is for multiple reasons. One is to attack a very low latency problem, which is primarily for factory automation, etc. And the other is implementation in very high frequency bands like say the FR2, what they call 25 gigahertz and above. So those were the real motivations, the very low latency sub 1 millisecond and the higher frequency implementations. We don't have the higher frequency implementations covered as a part. We are still around 7 gigahertz maximum, and we want a unified standard for that. And two is that, the very low latency problem, has multiple dimensions. We are not a scheduled system, remember. So to promise extremely low deterministic latency numbers, I think one has to be careful. You have to have a lot more under control. Bringing another flexible subcarrier spacing model is always fraught with challenges. It will add a lot of complexity as well.
Any other question?
Oh, okay. I think Samartha have. Yeah.
Hey, Srikanth. I just wanted to understand your thought on from the IoT perspective. So you touched upon cellular and Wi-Fi. So OFDMA is in cellular and OFDMA is also in Wi-Fi. Correct. So from the today's topic perspective, OFDMA is not so hit. So how the IoT scenarios will be handled when we talk about moving between cellular to Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi to cellular back. So how from the IoT perspective, what is your thought? So is that going to be a hit, or again we see some lag there?
So when you say IoT, are you talking about interoperability? We were referring to IoT more from the Internet of Things perspective. Okay. See, cellular Wi-Fi has been a challenge from 3G time. And there were some moves made, mostly nothing related to the radio. It's all related more towards the core network side, as we call in the cellular world, where operators, badly call Wi-Fi as an untrusted network. I mean, you can think how 802.11 would have reacted to that. So there is bad blood between these two camps, okay? Though they want to collaborate, and a lot of people are in both camps. I mean, when you call somebody else untrusted, you will have to look at them carefully. Things have changed. But I don't think there is such a clamor now. For example, 5G has a whole host of schemes by which you can do a lot of things in a 5G network to accommodate Wi-Fi and all, but I don't have anybody talking about this today in actual implementation. Today, we use the old style techniques of 3G, 4G, where, we tunnel the Wi-Fi and authenticate with their SIM credentials, etc., with the cellular core network. and then, allow them to use the Wi-Fi, typically an operator deployed Wi-Fi. That is what has happened so far. If whenever open roaming, etc., takes off in a big way, I think we might see a little bit more by using some of the cellular credentials and so on.
Okay, we can take the rest of the questions during lunch or coffee break. Thank you so much, Srikanth, for the informative session. Please give a round of applause for Srikanth.